Okay, good morning. I'm Laura Gunter, president of NCBIO, and it looks like Amber has put the program agenda and speaker bios in the chat box, so you can find them there. I know folks are still joining, but we've got a pretty good number of folks on the line, so we're going to go ahead and, in the interest of time and getting to hear from all of our wonderful presenters, get started. Again, I'm Laura Gunter, president of NCBIO. Wish to welcome you all here today to our kickoff event, the Roadmap to Diversity in Life Sciences. We're excited by the high turnout and interest in the topic and appreciate your joining us today. So without further ado, I'm actually going to turn it over to one of our diversity committee co-chairs, Shaylah Nunn Jones, who handles government affairs and public affairs for Novo Nordisk. And Shaylah, thank you so much for helping us bring this committee and program to fruition. We could not have done it without you, and I will give the podium to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning. My fellow co-chair and I are actually here present at the NC Biotechnology Center. We were hoping the crowd would be full of faces, but we will take an empty auditorium anyway. On behalf of Novo Nordisk, I am delighted to be here with you. And I'm pinching myself a little because just 2 years ago, my fellow co-chair and I, Neil Jones, were standing right outside of this auditorium at NCBIO's 2019 annual meeting. It was a break time and we were doing what people do during breaks. We were having just casual little chit chat. And then we started to observe our surroundings and the topic turned to diversity and how this event was kind of a microcosm of the life science industry as a whole, and it reflected the limited diversity in it. Needless to say, that conversation did not stop there. And today I'm super excited and super proud that we are able to bring this conversation today forward. NCBIO's leadership on the topic of diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces is to be commended. Their support of our industry companies will foster deep and sometimes difficult conversations. Conversations that are healthy for not just our companies and our employees, but also the patient populations that we serve. Like all life science companies represented here today, Novo Nordisk's commitment to driving change to help our patients live healthy and productive lives means that we have a responsibility to make diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging part of everything we do, from developing our products to building and supporting our workforce. Now I have the pleasure of introducing my esteemed colleague, Neil Jones. He's Vice President of Corporate Strategic Partnerships at Lindy Biosciences. Neil's experience in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry is vast. From benchtop drug discovery companies to executive leadership roles, he has done it all. Currently, he leads the corporate strategy and business development operations at Lindy, a biotech company developing innovative drug formulation and drug delivery solutions for patients suffering from debilitating chronic diseases. He earned his bachelor's degree from right here in North Carolina at UNC Chapel Hill. Neil?
Thank you, Shaylah. I'm so glad that you decided to join us here today. As Shaylah mentioned before about being in this auditorium, and as I look around here, I can only imagine what it would be like to have this facility, this auditorium, just overflowing with diversity. People gathered here sharing their experiences and their journeys. And just keep in mind that our journeys may be different, but our destination remains the same, and that's diversity. I've had the opportunity to talk with a few of you who are watching to understand and hear about your experiences. And it wasn't easy with some of you, but you were able to talk about that. And so I just want to share with you about what the experience is like. Share with you a story about a person whose journey for diversity started years ago as a small young boy who was always fascinated with the sciences. And so much so that one Christmas, he asked Santa, say, would you bring me a chemistry set? And I'm pretty sure Santa was thinking to himself, what? A chemistry set? I don't recall getting to ask for it. Why not a football or basketball? but no, you want a chemistry set. He even checked with his elves probably to make sure that we could actually, see back then we didn't have Amazon, so he couldn't ask Amazon if they could bring it. But the bottom line is he has started that journey. And that journey wasn't easy as he began to figure out what is it I want to do. I want to go off to college. I want to get into the industry. I want to take advantage. I want to help people. I want to make better medicines. And so as he began to go off into the industry, he started facing some adversity and also trying to find his way to diversity. So he heard that diversity and adversity is a package. Every time that he thought he was moving ahead, adversity said no, but he was still determined. So he'd go back again. And then adversity said to him, not now. But he wouldn't accept that not now. He says, I'm going to use it instead of a no and a not yet to another opportunity. And he had the opportunity by having someone says, I want you to be a part of our team. We're going to recruit you. We want you to be a part of our executive team. What an opportunity. Yes, an African-American man who believed that he belonged and he wanted to be there. So he helped this company grow. And as the company grew, they had this grand opening. And he'll never forget that for this reason. As he was at the podium, just like I'm standing now, he was speaking to the audience. And he could see his mother who was sitting out in the audience because he invited his mother. And she was dressed in her Sunday's best. And when he left the podium to go speak to his mother, she was sitting there, she was rocking, just like a mother does. And she said, son, I didn't quite understand all the things you were saying. But when I began to look around that room, I saw all those people who were actually clapping and nodding their heads and smiling. She said, son, you look like you belong. And I said, Mom, guess what? I do belong, and I'm here now. So that journey continues as I begin to move forward, move on to where we are right now, is to talk about our keynote speaker. Mona Babury, she's an incredible person. And when I first was introduced to her, I said, what manner of person or woman is this who says, you know, I'm going to dedicate my career, my profession to making a difference when it comes to diversity and DEI. Now, her position, as you've heard before, is Global DEI Lead for Pfizer. But when you talk with Mona, she began to share with you her passion and her commitment and her tears of joy, not tears of sorrow, but tears of strength to encourage others. So it kind of reminds me of a quote, that just like ripples spread whenever you drop a single pebble into water, the acts of individuals are far reaching. And Mona, I just want to say to you, your actions have been far reaching. They have echoed from the CEO to the corridors of Pfizer and out into the community. So with me, it is with great pleasure to introduce not the pebble, but a pearl of diversity. Ms. Mona Babury, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for the heartfelt welcome. You promised one, you definitely delivered. I wish I could be there in person with you today, and perhaps next year we'll be in a better place to do that. So everyone, my name is Mona Babury, and I am the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead at Pfizer. I'm responsible for the Pfizer Global Supply Organization, Finance, and Global Business Solutions Organization, so about a third of the company. So I'm really excited to be here, along with a panel of inspiring leaders that you're going to hear from today. But before I get started, if you go to the next slide, the following one, I'd like to pause. So, for our pause, please. In DEI, we have a statement we hear over and over again, and that's bring your authentic self. And I try to bring my authentic self everywhere I go. We are also very familiar with the words advocacy, allyship, and activism. And those words remind me of a conversation I had during a DEI certification training that we had in DC a few years ago with my team. As the instructor was reading the definitions, all eyes turned to me after the definition of activists. The instructor proceeded to state, as DEI leaders, we need to know when to switch between advocacy, allyship, and activism. Of course, I like to do all three at the same time, which can be sometimes exhausting. And so understanding that you need to be present in the moment for each one a little bit differently was something that I took away from that course. So today, before we begin, I didn't want to proceed without a pause. There's so much going on in the world today, and an important part of our roles in DEI is to make time to build awareness. And it's through that awareness that we build understanding and empathy. And so I want to pause here in remembrance of the lives lost in Haiti due to the devastating earthquake, with thousands of lives lost and impacted. For those with family and friends in Haiti, my thoughts are with you. I also want to pause for the tragic events happening in Afghanistan. I'm personally affected. My husband is from Afghanistan, and he was one of the lucky ones that fled the country about 35 years ago before the takeover. So he was able to get away. Many of the scenes of Afghan people fleeing for their lives, thousands on their way here, not because they chose to, but because they are fleeing for their lives. The scenes of mothers throwing their children over the barbed wires and asking the soldiers to give their kids a better life have haunted me. There's so much happening in the world today. Everyone has a story. Everyone is impacted in some way. So I ask that you go back and leverage your employee match programs to help those people in desperate need right now, whether it's volunteering your time with the families and helping someone get a driver's license, or donating a monetary amount to an organization providing urgent medical need to Haiti. There's something each one of us on this call can go off and do and be doing more of for people in need. So with that, I'm going to pause, just reflect on that for a minute, and then we can move on into the next slide. So before I go into DEI Pfizer, I like to share a little bit about my career. So I've been with the company for 14 years, and I've had a very unconventional path, and I'm hoping you'll pull away some lessons from my path that you can apply to your companies. I graduated in 2006 with a bachelor's in HR management. I worked full-time and went to school full-time. As the daughter of immigrants, no connections to the corporate world or understanding of it. I applied and applied and applied to many roles at many companies, and I never received a call back, just rejection emails. I didn't know at the time about bias on resume with names. Had I known that, I would have loved to experiment and change my last name, my maiden name, from Abdallah to Dell. Just drop a few letters, let's test it out, see if I get any callbacks. But I didn't know at that time. Anyhow, I interviewed for a role as an admin assistant at Wyeth. Wyeth was the company that Pfizer purchased. I think back to that moment when the hiring manager, who's still a mentor to me today, told me that you have your degree, you have work experience. Why would you take this role? And I was at the absolute end of my search, and not having an internship made it so much more difficult to get into entry-level fields in pharma, business, IT, all areas that I was very interested in. So I'm really thankful for that conversation, because he gave me the opportunity to tell him I'll do the admin work and I'll take on projects. And so I did. I automated the first solution for tracking our counterfeit drug cases for Wyeth. Just a few years later, I was promoted to a project analyst. I was leading a $60 million sterilization program in the head PMO office. I continued my journey through supply chain, moving into something called market transformation, working with people all over the world to help advance our supply chain processes across the world. And then I began pursuing my next challenge, an area I wasn't comfortable with at all, that's finance and portfolio management. So I took my next role in the business technology organization. I learned how to manage an IT portfolio. I took on delivering simplification across our capital portfolio process in technology. And in parallel, I brought to our New Jersey site a program called Business Technology for Girls. So I was reaching out to inner city schools and bringing in high school girls into Pfizer for the day to teach them about careers in STEM and challenge some of those biases associated with STEM, especially for females and women. I learned through a Microsoft study that most girls lose interest in STEM in 9th grade. And that's a study that was done pretty recent. And so it became my passion to kind of tackle that bias very early on. And it became the work that I love to do the most, touching hundreds of girls every year and really making an impact on what they select to do for the rest of their lives. Naturally, when the D&I lead became available, I spoke to my manager. I spoke to my sponsor. They connected me with the hiring manager for a conversation. I designed a plan. I went in for the interview, which was a cell of every transferable skill that I had. And at the end of the interview, I said, this is what I want to do. This is my purpose. When can I get started? I didn't leave an option for him to make another selection. A few weeks later, I was offered the position. So it took me 10 years to figure out exactly what I do. It took me 11 years to get ready for that role. And now I'm truly in a place where I don't feel like my work is a job. It's my purpose. I tell my son every day, I go to work to change the world. And I truly believe that. So I'm hoping you get a few lessons from my career path. Don't make the assumption that someone is overqualified. You do not know their situation, and you may be missing out on great talent who is eager to work and contribute and advance. Be open to transferable skills. These leaders could have looked at my resume and said, no supply chain experience, no technology experience, no HR experience, and I wouldn't have been open to the career path that I had. Instead, they looked at my transferable skills and what I was able to contribute to the organization. You may not get to where you're supposed to be right out of college. I wanted to go into HR out of college. It took me 10 years to get into HR. So be open to growth opportunities along the way. When I look back, I have absolutely no regrets. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And those experiences that I gained over the years at Pfizer helped me in the position that I'm in today. So on to the next slide. A little bit about me personally. I am Egyptian American. So I mentioned my parents immigrated here from Egypt, first born in the US. My husband is from Afghanistan. He left Afghanistan at the early age of 5 before the Russians came in about 35, 40 years ago. On the bottom left, I like a little bit adventure. That's us in Egypt on dirt bikes. I have a little dog. She's 2 years old, a golden doodle. Her name is Bella. I'm an absolute foodie. I love seafood. Over in the top right corner, that's my family in Egypt. I usually like to go every 2 years, but something called the pandemic has gotten in the way the last year or so. On the bottom right corner is my son, Adam. He is 8 years old and he aspires to be an NBA player one day. And all the way in the right corner are my closest friends, Tasha and Anna. So just a little bit about my background, what's important to me before we proceed into more about Pfizer. So if we go to the next slide, and just the following one, I'm going to start off with our Pfizer values. So we have 4 core values at Pfizer that we operate by, we try to live by. They define everything that we do. That's courage, excellence, joy, and equity. For us, equity means that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and cared for. And we do that by being inclusive, acting with integrity, and doing everything we can to reduce healthcare disparities. And if we go to the next slide, I want to pause a little bit on the definition between equality and equity, because certainly when we introduced this new value to the organization, there was a little bit of, we had to define it a little bit more, because typically when you see the word equity, you're like, this is financial, I don't get it. What's the difference between equality and equity? And it's important to understand equality is giving everyone the same thing and just expecting everyone can reach, in this case, the apple on the tree. For equity, it's taking that time to understand what each individual person needs, or in this case, to reach the apple on the tree. And equity certainly takes more time. It takes more investment and it takes more work. But it is the right thing to do to make sure that everyone, regardless of where they're starting from, has that opportunity to succeed, have equal access to healthcare, have the opportunity to grow, earn a paycheck, have an opportunity to a position at your company. So I'm hoping you walk away with equity. Once everyone can reach the apple, we can talk about equality, but I think we first need to get to equity. If we go to the next slide, a little bit about Pfizer and what we do. Obviously, you know us for our COVID vaccine, recently approved by the FDA fully. We're celebrating here at Pfizer. We're very excited. And that really ties to our purpose at Pfizer. Our purpose is to achieve breakthroughs that change patients' lives. And we know that purpose is driven, our competitive advantage, it's all about our people. That means not only attracting the best and brightest talent, but it's also ensuring that our colleagues can thrive in an environment where we champion diversity, equity, and inclusion every day around the world. In our purpose blueprint, we have 5 focus areas. The first one is to unleash the power of our people and make Pfizer an amazing workplace for all. And that's really the focus of my presentation today. D&I is embedded in our purpose blueprint across the entire blueprint in every part, but I'm going to focus on the people today. If we go to the next slide. So I'm very proud of our DEI efforts across the board, especially the last few years. Our ultimate inspiration is to be as diverse as the patients and communities we serve. Our DEI strategy has 4 pillars. The patients pillar focuses our efforts on closing healthcare disparities in diverse communities across the world. Ultimately, we want all patients to have equal access to healthcare and accessible and affordable drugs. The colleagues pillar is the pillar that my role is aligned to, and we have 4 D&I leads at the company, and we partner with the business to build strategies that make us a sought-after destination for diverse talent globally. And the way we do that is that ensuring D&I is embraced in all aspects of our business. We tie it to goals, we tie it to our strategy, and we make it a priority. In the communities pillar, we're focused on promoting and supporting policies that promote fairness, equality, and respect for people. And finally, in our partners pillar, we're committed to working with suppliers and vendors who share our values, partnerships like the National Society of Black Engineers, the Human Rights Campaign, Catalyst, Disability In, Thurgood Marshall College Fund, Society of Women Engineers, HBCU Connect, and those are just a few that help us along the way. We also maintain a robust supplier diversity program so that underrepresented or disadvantaged businesses have an equal opportunity to compete for our business. And we also do that by providing scholarships for diverse business leaders to attend leadership and different mentorship programs. So if we go to the next slide. So the next few examples are exactly how we live our value of equity. And if we go to the next slide, it's a quote from our CEO. And this quote was released immediately after the George Floyd murder. And we know that 2020 marked a very important inflection point when it comes to the role of corporations in society. And I'm so proud of the ways in which Pfizer stepped up to lead. Our leaders stood up for social justice and brought the conversation to the workplace. As you see from his quote here, it's important that we all actively speak out against racial injustice, confront conscious and unconscious bias, and lead conversations with colleagues and those in our communities. So this was permission. We didn't typically talk about race. We didn't talk about social justice in the workplace. And so this was permission from the CEO setting the example that now is the time to talk about it, because we understand that this impacts our colleagues, our patients, our communities. And so we need to talk about it. And not only did we talk about it, we listened and we took action. If we go to the next slide. We set concrete goals to address systematic racism and gender equity challenges. We looked at our data, we augmented our plan, and we increased diversity and opportunity parity by 2025. So we're particularly focusing on female and US minority representation at our leadership level. So as you see here, for our VP plus population, we're aiming to get to 47% women by 2025. And then for US minority, that's 32% by 2025. And we're trending in the right direction each year, making significant impact year over year to get us to those goals. We have a new environmental, social, and governance report, ESG, and it represents a really new chapter in Pfizer's commitment to be transparent, to enhance stakeholder awareness of our priority ESG issues, and disclose how our performance on non-financial metrics are contributing to long-term value creation. So do check that out. It's a link in our annual report. And in this report, we outline things like employee engagement scores, our culture, values, partnerships that we've made with organizations. One of the partnerships is with the National Association of Manufacturers to increase opportunity for people of color in the US. And one of the other things we highlight is our pay equity study. For the second year in a row, Pfizer announced both internally and externally the findings of our pay equity study, and it's based on role, education, experience, performance, and location. And we found that Pfizer pays our female colleagues globally at 99.3% of what we pay male colleagues. And when we look at minority versus non-minority pay in the US, we're almost dollar for dollar parity, 99.8% with the pay of non-minorities. Our commitment to pay equity for all colleagues is based on our value of equity and our intention to continue to build a diverse and inclusive workforce. We are addressing health inequities by making the commitment last year for the first time to match clinical trial demographics with the country's demographics. So if you went to the clinical trial for our vaccine here in the US, on the bottom right corner, you'll see the makeup of that clinical trial broken down by race and gender. And it is our intention that every country in which we have clinical trials in, we will match the demographics of that country. We will increase our spend with diverse owned suppliers by 50% by 2025. And finally, we know all of these goals are great, but we also need to make sure that educating every colleague from our executive leaders down to our shop floor on how to be more inclusive and create a sense of belonging for our colleagues. So if you want to learn more, I encourage you again to read about our commitments to DEI in our ESG report, where the first time also we have published our human capital metrics by level, by gender, and by race. If we go to the next slide, I've spoken a lot about our gender and US minority goals, but I want you to know that our commitments are also much more broader than that. We have many diverse dimensions, and that's just a part of it. And I'm proud to highlight some of those examples here. Our work with refugees, our stance on religious hate crimes against Muslim and Jewish people, our work to eliminate healthcare disparities in communities of color, our support of our Black colleagues, Asian colleagues, people with disabilities, our veterans, our LGBTQ+ population, and many more. That's just a small part of our DEI strategy and involvement. We go to the next slide. Our more than 100 global colleague resource groups tying into these 7 resource groups around the world offer support, developmental opportunities, mentoring, and networking opportunities to help their members enhance their skills, advance their careers, and network. With this year's global pandemic and social justice movements, our CRGs hosted virtual events with external speakers and internal leaders to discuss things like equity, systematic racism, allyship, clinical trial diversity, and COVID-19's impact specifically on Black and Latino communities. We also held a global conversation on race for our annual Diversity and Inclusion Summit with Dr. Ibram Kendi, and we continued for the first time that conversation on race with regional discussions around the world. If we go to the next slide. These are just some examples of things that we're doing to create inclusive spaces. I mentioned earlier, one of our partnerships is with Catalyst, and Catalyst has a lot of great, easy to use resources that you can leverage with teams. And some of those resources are highlighted here. They have a calendar of being inclusive every day. There is something called Flip the Script on the words we use, teaching us about ways that phrases impact women or minorities or just diversity in general from advancing. There's also a picture here of Standing Up for Women's Equality Day, and just really focused on building inclusive workspaces through education and awareness and making a place where colleagues feel celebrated and feel like they belong. And if we go to the next slide. So I've highlighted really at Pfizer what's been working the last 2 years, ever since we've made some of those external commitments. And I know today you'll learn a little bit more about, different roadmaps to DEI, and I wanted to share with you my experience on what's been working with Pfizer. So the first thing I think that's really important is to start with your data. You cannot understand your opportunity until you understand the data with every dimension. I want you to look at gender by level. I want you to look at US minority by level. I want you to look at promotions, hiring, turnover by level. Understand that by gender and by US minority as well. Take a look at your hiring funnel. Are you getting the applicants? Are they qualified? Are the hiring managers selecting the applicants for the interview, and ultimately are they being selected? Lastly, a manufacturing organization looks completely different than a finance organization. So I support manufacturing and finance, and within our finance, we just happen to have more women. And so our focus is really on US minority and developing and acquiring and sourcing that talent. And so for leaders to understand their part of the puzzle, you have to present them with the relevant facts to understand where they can make the impact. Once you have a good understanding of what that data tells you, you can work on establishing your goals. And what does parity mean to your organization? For Pfizer, parity was 47% women and 32% US minority. We chose those numbers because that's our population at Pfizer. We are 47% women and 32% US minority. And we wanted to make sure that that was reflective in our leaders. So are your leaders reflective of your workforce? Do you have a gap at a certain level of the pipeline? These are the questions that you have to understand from the data in order to put where you need to go. Once you have all of that, put together a plan of how you will achieve that goal. Make sure you're thinking not only about sourcing talent, but how are you going to retain and grow your talent? And how are you going to engage and inspire your workforce? So DEI isn't just about sourcing. You have to have a plan that encompasses the entire talent cycle. Then you sustain leadership support, starting from the top. You know, there's grassroots things that happen, but you want this to cascade across the entire organization. So make sure your CEO, your executive leadership team, and your HR partners are aligned and supportive. Then cascade the plan to the relevant population to help with the execution, which leads me into my final step: establish accountability and measure progress. Some organizations establish accountability by tying to compensation. Some have a lighter touch where it's in your goals, you're tracking it, or maybe it's outside of your goals, you're tracking it somehow. But if you don't have a plan, you're not measuring progress, I think it's going to be very difficult to advance and move the needle to where you want to go. And finally, my last slide. I leave you with a few more bits of advice as you start, continue, or accelerate your journey. I challenge you to think differently. Think differently about how you reach the talent you want to reach. Think differently about how you engage your workforce. Think differently about how you retain your workforce. That might mean doing something completely different than what you're doing, and be open to that. I ask you, how committed are you to lead courageously? Bring those new, sometimes what may be seen as outrageously bold ideas to the table. I find myself starting my sentences sometimes with, I have an idea, you may not like it, but if I don't put it out there in the universe, I may not be able to sleep tonight. And so sometimes my conversations do really start like that. And I find that those bold and outrageous ideas are the ones that can make the biggest, greatest impact. And I'll give you the example of Joshua Nelson. One of my HR partners, Lerone Braze, was browsing through social media and came upon an article about a high school student who received a full scholarship. And so the money that he saved all through high school, he decided to donate and start a scholarship fund for underrepresented students to go to college. In reading more about his background and the things that he was doing for his community, we were like, this kid, he aligns to the values at Pfizer, and this is the kind of leaders that we want for tomorrow. Now with Pfizer, we haven't hired high school students before. So this was something completely new, but we knew we just had to engage with Joshua to see what kind of interest he had. So I took to Google, I found his Instagram, and I sent him a DM. For those that don't know, don't have an Instagram, a direct message is for those, it's a direct message for those that don't have IG. The next day I had an email from his guidance counselor. She messaged me and connected me to his mother. We had a conversation with Joshua and we learned more about his interests, and we went back to the business that he was most aligned to, which was our medical organization. And we were able to secure Joshua a recent high school graduate, a 5-week internship. In those 5 short weeks, Joshua contributes so much value, but I think the most impactful value was for us and for our leaders. He indirectly challenged our perception of what we thought when early talent would be ready to join our workforce. I am telling you, Joshua put better presentations than I have seen for professionals in the business for 15 years. He put a better deck together than maybe I could. So definitely challenged our idea of what a ready workforce is. So think differently, lead courageously, and finally, act with empathy. Everyone has a story, everyone is working through something, and just taking that pause to know your team on an individual basis so that you can be more aware of the things that impact them the most, the things that are important to them, is so important and so meaningful. I love this quote from Oprah. She says, leadership is about empathy. It's about having the ability to relate to and connect with people for the purpose of inspiring and empowering their lives. Thank you for having me today. I believe we are on to Q&A.
Thank you, Mona, so much. As I said earlier, you are indeed a pearl for diversity, and you covered so much, and some of the questions that I had in mind, just like, well, what am I going to ask you now? But I do want to thank you again for your last comment about the young man. A songwriter said in a song that I believe that children are our future, and teach them well and let them lead the way. And I thank you for taking that under your wings and saying that we're going to teach you to believe in yourselves and the beauty within yourself, but also the beauty on the outside. And so that's a strong message as we try to recruit, not only just within the industry, but those who are thinking or not even thinking about the industry. So I guess I will form one question is, what is your message to the viewers in terms of getting this message out? What can we do? What would you suggest? Because I know this hasn't been an easy, straightforward task. Nothing is easy these days. And I know when you present it, everything's just flowing. But share with us what's your message? Because if there are obstacles, it's okay. Can you share that with us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. There are certainly obstacles. I have to tell you, you need to find your circle at your companies, and that circle has to be made of people that can help drive your ideas as well. So my circle is made up of very senior leaders at Pfizer, leaders throughout the BUs and organizations, and you have to build trust with them. I think one of the benefits that I have is that I've worked within the business that now I support from DEI. So the leaders have that trust. They know Mona can run with this and drive results. And so I think you have to intentionally seek out those partners that will help you drive the ideas that you have. I have an amazing HR SVP at Pfizer. Her name is Sherry Casano. I'm shouting her out. When I bring her bold ideas, she's just so receptive to it and helps me advance it and make the connection so that I can advance on those ideas as well. So I think just build your circle of people that can help you drive impact.
Thank you so much, Mona. I'll repeat it again. Indeed, you are a pearl of and for diversity. So keep things moving along and continue this journey. I want to invite Shaylah back to the stage. Thank you so much again, Mona.
Well, thank you again, Mona. That was a wonderful, wonderful keynote. I really appreciate you being with us and giving your time today. Next, we're going to have two panels. And I want to invite all of our guests who are online to make sure you're dropping your questions into the chat function. There will be a moment for some Q&A after each panel. Our first panel is the Attract and Recruit panel. We're all here today because there is a fundamental debate happening across America, a recognition that diverse and inclusive workplaces are ultimately an impact to a company's bottom line. But how do you attract and recruit diverse candidates? It's never as simple as just the right advert on the right job board. And we'll find out more in a minute. But first, I want to introduce our moderator for the Attract and Recruit panel discussion, Tiffany Ettinger, Associate Director of External Manufacturing for Merck. Tiffany leads business integration and the materials management team for the small molecule drug product device and packaging platform. She returned to Merck in 2021 after serving as a program manager at Fujifilm Diosynth Biotechnologies. Before Fujifilm, Tiffany spent 10 years at the Merck Durham site in operational excellence, technical operations, and validation roles. She has earned her BS in biomedical engineering from Northwestern University. And Tiffany, I'd love for you to take over and lead us through an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Shayla. Everybody's in for a treat with this panel. We try to select people with diverse backgrounds and experiences across various company sizes. And so you'll see across the DEI movement that it's not a one size fits all. And the roadmap to diversity in the life sciences really begins here at the attraction and recruitment. And that goes for all the levels, from entry level to the executive level. So this is in fact a very critical discussion that I'm happy to be leading. So I personally am excited for this discussion as a non-HR person myself, but as a hiring manager. And so my HR counterparts have a lot of access to resources and trainings and certifications, but how do we make sure that what they learn and bring back to their companies filters down to the people with hiring decisions? And so what we want to do here is not to answer all your questions, but hopefully to just begin the discussion that you can bring back to your company and carry on the discussion there. So as a reminder to submit your questions in the Q&A box, there's a chat box as well as a Q&A box. And so certainly we want to give our panelists an opportunity to answer questions that you have out there. So first I'd like to introduce my amazing panelists. First we have Cheryl Gonzalez, who is Associate Consultant of Recruiting at Lilly. She has been there for 9 years, serving in various capacities. Right now, she works to create the most diverse, outstanding, and talented workforce in the entire industry. Prior to Lilly, she worked as a research associate and scientist, and she graduated from University in Puerto Rico. So next, we have Dawn Losinger, Associate Director and Head of Talent Recruitment at Precision Biosciences. She has more than 17 years of technical recruiting experience, and so we certainly look forward to hearing from her experience there in the biopharma industry. She joined Precision in 2018 and heads the talent acquisition and talent management function. She graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology and is a certified diversity recruiter. Last but not least, we have Richard Stallings, who is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at Novozymes. He joined the Novo family in 1997 and has 23 years of production experience. And in 2021, he was promoted to his current role in the DEI space. So welcome to my panelists. If you could turn on your cameras and unmute your mics. We're excited to talk to you three. So the first question is for Cheryl. Morning, Cheryl.
Good morning, everyone. Really nice to be here with you and learning and sharing knowledge. It's a privilege.
Our first question is, what are some pitfalls companies may not be aware of in their current recruitment process that is inhibiting attraction of diverse candidates?
I think that the biggest pitfall is thinking that one size fits all. You might be going to colleges and trying to tap into candidates, but not people from different backgrounds. They all don't connect to you the same way. And it is important that the people that you have in your team have that cultural awareness, how to connect to others, and that your strategy is based off relationship building. It is not because you have 10 jobs now that you have to fill. It's thinking a year from now, I'm going to have 10 jobs. How am I going to connect to that diverse pipeline so that I can actually, plan ahead and the relationships produce at the end of the day the outcome that we want. We need to think about making sure that we are looking at sources that are not traditional, because often people from diverse backgrounds might have a different path to success that is not what we typically think about, like going to the Ivy League school or following the traditional path that people from more privileged background have. Often they have to work and study. Often they complete their degrees later. So how are we making sure that we're looking at talent from all sources and not just where we think the talent is? We need to find talent where they are.
How about Richard? Do you want to take on this question too? What are some common pitfalls that companies may not be aware of that you've seen?
I believe a part of that is listening to the employees. Their voices are critical. So that is something that companies need to look at, is to hear the voice of the people.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, Dawn. You gonna give your take on this question? What are some pitfalls that companies may not be aware of?
I think unconscious bias really does come into play there. And the realization that we do all have it, and it's just a fact of life. And the first step is to really, be aware of that by having our hiring managers and our interview teams more engaged and aware of that, I think is just a huge benefit.
Thank you. All right, and then Dawn, I'll let you start with the next question. What language or qualifications do you see in job postings that might be unnecessarily preventing diverse candidates from being attracted to the role? And then how do we make sure that we're writing more inclusive job postings?
Yeah, I think there's some really easy ways to update our job descriptions and job postings to make sure that they are being more inclusive. One of those, for instance, would be the use of gender pronouns. So using they rather than he or he/she, or using, the word the employee instead of saying he will be doing, that type of thing. Also, eliminating the use of gender coded words, and what those are words that are biased towards one gender or another. So examples of words that may be biased towards men would be things like rock star or guru. Words that may be biased towards women include things like collaborative or supportive. And the use of these words in the job postings may actually influence someone's decision whether they want to apply to a job or not. There are several free tools that you can use that will help you kind of discover if you have any gender coded words in your job descriptions. The easiest thing to do is just to Google gender decoder, and there's several of those that will pop up. You can actually enter your job description in there and it will highlight things that you may want to consider changing. Some of the other things would be to make sure that the requirements that you're listing in the job description are actually required for the position, not just preferences that you may have. So you may have heard statistics that men will apply for a job when they feel like they meet about 60% of the qualifications, whereas women will only apply if they feel like they meet almost all of the qualifications. So if you're including skills that are not specifically required, you're going to be actually deterring about half of your candidates from applying. And you also want to be able to include educational equivalence. So is a degree really required for this position? Is it possible that somebody who has not obtained a degree is able to do this role? And so you would want to include things like, this degree or equivalent combination of training, experience, education, that type of thing. You also want to be careful about age and experience bias. So avoiding company or corporate jargon is going to help people who might be new to the workforce or people who may be re-entering the workforce understand the role better. They may be unfamiliar with some company or corporate jargon. Also, terms like digital native implies a younger candidate, when what you really need is somebody who has strong technical experience. They don't need necessarily to be young and to have been raised, being online the whole time. And you also want to be aware of not excluding candidates with any type of disability. So focusing on how a job needs to be accomplished. For instance, you may have a position that says the ability to lift 50 pounds. Does the person doing that role actually need to lift it, or do they just need to move it, right? Can they use other means to get that same job done? Maybe the position says someone needs to be able to stand for the entire shift. Well, do they actually need to be standing, or do they just need to be stationary? So considering things like that may exclude other populations. And also allowing candidates to apply outside of your ATS. So is there another method that they can use to indicate interest in your opening?
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don. I'm going to follow up with a question that came up in the chat box that's relevant to your answer. Is your company currently using algorithms to review resumes? Okay, so right now it's a person screening.
It is 100% a person looking at each application and each resume, yes.
So the question was around the algorithms. I don't know if you have experience with if our other panelists do around the biased around algorithms that are reviewing resumes. Richard or Cheryl, are your companies using any kind of algorithms to review resumes coming in?
We are not using algorithms for that specific reason. They can simplify the work for the recruiter, but it can really hamper your strategy because often you're going to eliminate people based on very specific attributes, for example, years of experience, that type of thing. And if your job description is not developed in a way that aligns with that algorithm, you might be completely eliminating people that have the drive and the potential to learn and the transferable skills that will make them successful for a role that you can really tell if you're looking for specific attributes.
All right. What about you, Richard? Do you have thoughts on using algorithms to review resumes?
Yeah, well, we at Novozymes, we use a company called Circa that reaches out to over 7,500 colleges and universities, and that includes minorities. So that's something that we have recently done.
Okay, thank you. And then Richard, while you're still talking to us, what do you have anything to add around language or qualifications in job postings that might be preventing diverse candidates from applying?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo Dawn, right? What she was saying about gender pronouns, for example, like using in emails. I mean, I was just recently in a meeting, right? And we had a round the table introduction of ourselves, and we were asked to pronounce to give our pronouns. Well, when it came to me, then, Richard loves everybody, and I made the comment, well, you can call me anything. It doesn't matter to me. And what I meant by that was that, I love everyone, and it doesn't matter what gender, nationality of that nature that you are. That was my intent. But what I learned from this is that can be perceived and taken the wrong way. And that comes from the lack of knowledge and understanding and awareness around different things. And that's why I'll share with you later. And that's why we are on a learning and development journey so that we can learn how to be able to address these things. And once we begin to be educated about these things and have awareness, and then we have a better understanding.
Thank you. Cheryl, anything to add on job postings?
I think that your job posting needs to talk to the candidate, right? It should not be something cold and very black and white kind of thing. I believe that your job description, once the person starts, that needs to be that, but a job ad needs to be something that talks to the audience. What kind of person are you trying to attract? And make it engaging. Often we just slap the job description thinking that, because this is what we need, but how am I connecting to people that way? And often you would see females detracted because the job description doesn't fit their profile. And you will see candidates that will have really great transferable skills from other industries that might completely not apply to a job just because it's written for someone with that specific skill set, or someone that left your team because they retire, or because they moved on to something else. So make sure that you're writing job ads that are talking to your audience, and make sure your audience is broad.
Thank you. All right, Richard, this next question is for you to start off with. How can companies encourage the hiring managers to challenge biases throughout the interview and hiring process?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And I was told that I only have 2 minutes to talk, and Richard loves to talk. So I'm going to get right to it. And before I get started, I want to share with you that we at Novozymes are really committed to a fair and equitable hiring practices. It is our goal to hire and retain the best candidates, regardless of their age, regardless of their gender, race, religion, or nationality. In order to challenge our biases, conscious and unconscious, we must first recognize and accept that we all have them, all of us. One of the ways we can challenge our biases is to take our managers through a learning and development training versus a one and done training. Let me say that again, because this is so important. One of the ways we can challenge our biases is to take our managers through a learning and development training versus a one and done training. Another way is to include an experienced P&O or HR person that can recognize and point out possible biases that occurs during the hiring process. This can help ensure any obvious bias is addressed before the job offer is made. And just like Mona stated, creating a level of awareness is really the starting point. And when we look to biotech, we have a responsibility to ensure that these biases don't hinder our ability to attract, retain, and enable a more diverse and inclusive workforce. We believe educating our managers on ways to challenge biases throughout the interview process is so very critical to our success at Novozymes. We want all our managers to feel comfortable in having those very uncomfortable conversations, especially when it's around recruiting and retaining new talent. We also at Novozymes have many processes in place to ensure our hiring practices are fair and inclusive. One of the ways that we are keeping diversity, equity, inclusion at the top of our minds and at the forefront is we've recently added a new company regional value called Choose to Include. And in closing, I want to state that we want all our managers and all our employees to be able to bring their best, whole, authentic selves to work each and every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. How about to Cheryl? How can companies encourage their hiring managers to challenge biases throughout the process? Are you talking on mute, Cheryl?
My apologies for that. I think that it is very important that we are aware of those biases, right? At a very personal level. That is not just, oh, here you have to take the unconscious bias training, and all these mandated things, but rather that it's a culture that it's natural and organic. And that is not going to happen from one day to the next. That is going to take time because you have to meet people where they are. And you need to be able to understand that some people might not be as knowledgeable of some issues from some communities. They might think that hiring an LGBTQ candidate is the same as hiring a veteran, right? Like that they don't have biases against specific groups. But sometimes we do. And sometimes we, even if you're a diverse candidate or if you're a minority employee or minority manager, you still have your own biases. So it's got to be a comprehensive understanding that we all have biases and we are all in a journey of knowledge, and that it is our responsibility to develop ourselves to make sure that we don't only rely into what the company is providing to us to learn, but we are relating to people and connecting to make sure that we really can create that culture of belonging. And once you create that culture of belonging, then you're going to want to try to attract people that have similar culture than you, your values as a company. So I think it is very important that we understand that just because you might have metrics and mandated goals and accountability across the board is not going to happen in one day. It's going to take time, and we have to be patient, and we have to be willing to invest the time and the money to make sure things are successful.
Thank you. How about Dawn? How can we encourage our hiring managers to challenge their own biases?
Yeah, I think Cheryl and Richard really hit on it. It's the awareness portion of it, and then being able to integrate it really into the company's day-to-day.
Okay, thank you. Richard, there's a follow-up for you from the attendees. Can you talk more about learning and development versus just one and done training? What do you have examples to give of some things that you've been able to implement?
Yes, and thank you for that question. When you think about training, that's kind of like an event, kind of like what we are having today, right? But when you think about a learning and development training process, that's like a journey. And a journey takes time. It's not something that can be done overnight. It is a process. And when you're on a learning and development journey, you begin to learn about yourselves. We learn about ourselves. You know, those conscious and unconscious bias that I was speaking of. And once that starts to happen, then we begin to transform. Wow, I begin to see things in a different light. And then once you start to transform, then you start to emerge. And once you start to emerge, then guess what? You begin to have those uncomfortable conversations now with your people, with your employees, with when you are recruited and in life in general. But until you go through that learning and development process and learn about yourself first, it starts with me, Richard. It starts with you. Like Cheryl was mentioned, it starts with us, the person in the mirror. It was a songwriter that it was named Michael Jackson. Most of you may know him. He may say, I want to start with the man in the mirror. Well, I'm starting with Richard because before I can expect anyone else to change, I have to change me. I have to look at myself. I have to identify my bias. I have to fix Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm also thankful that this session is being recorded. So we'll keep that one on the archives for you, Richard. So we had another question from the attendees. We'll kick it back to Dawn just to circle back on the job postings. And Mona had talked about the hiring funnel. Right. So how do we ensure that we're being effective in our job postings? And then I would extrapolate that further in our interviews and our recruiting. Like, how do we make sure that we're being effective at every level of the recruiting process?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to put some sort of measurement in place to determine, if there are improvements being made and if you're getting the results that you want. So I think that's really the first step, is to determine, what your current state is versus what your end goal is, and are you making incremental steps in getting there?
Okay, thank you. And then maybe Cheryl can help us, take it one step further. This was a question from attendees too. How do we determine the appropriate DEI targets and goals for hiring?
So that's a very nuanced question, because there are very different regulations, from different offices that will govern how you look at different groups. So definitely you're gonna have to have your legal or affirmative action, subject matter expert involved in that decision-making process. But I think it's also looking at, for example, I know that in my company, in our sales force, there's a lot of Hispanics, but there might not be a lot of Hispanics, in a different area, for example, science. And making sure that whatever efforts you are doing are really tackling, okay, so where are your areas of need? And again, I mentioned this earlier, that you have a realistic, comprehensive strategy, because you might put an aspirational goal for a specific area, but if there's no candidates there because the market doesn't have candidates, you're never going to be able to fill it. So what are you doing to ensure that there's a pipeline growing up where there's absence? So it's not just like going and trying to like hire someone from the current market. It's also having things in place that allow you to bring additional, people to a specific area. But I think if you do not understand well what your demographics are, what the market is for specific demographics out there, and by demographics I mean comprehensive, right? Age, gender, race, veteran status, disability status, gender. So you have to really understand where is the area of need, and then put a comprehensive plan that tackles those areas as needed. And you might need to have different strategies for each of the different areas and different goals for different organizations within your company, because the needs are going to be different depending on what you're looking at.
Thank you. So I love this next question because the whole conference today is on NC Life Sciences. And so I'm going to go through each of you. Can you please tell us some resources, some local minority focused resources where companies can expand their recruitment efforts? And again, we want to touch on entry level up all the way up to the executive level. So Cheryl, you can get us started on that one.
So I think that it is very important that we work with the people that know the community best. Your best pipelines are going to be the earlier you can get contact with a group. That's your best chance of success. So I think number one, go to your high school's systems and understand how those districts work, and have programs that pipeline people through very early all the way down to high school. And don't think about it as oh, I want like more scholarships for people that go finish PhDs, but you also want mechanics. You also want operators, right? So what type of programs you're having that are connecting with your schools, that are really producing students that want to go do something, but at the end of the day, they want to come work for you because you started that program, because your employees went to that school, because your employees were mentors, and serve, to connect people to have goals to belong to this industry, not just because there's better economic prospects, but because it's better for the community overall. We need to start by being responsible corporate citizens, and understanding what the needs of our community are is like very important. Of course, there's very great organizations like Step Up Durham and like El Centro Hispano that do have programs in place, to try to help people that's already looking for jobs to connect and to like find an opportunity, better opportunities for, better financial outcomes. And they are comprehensive, right? It's not just giving an opportunity to someone in the community that might not have had it before, but how are we supporting those communities to make sure that those people are successful with us? Maybe they don't have financial education. Maybe they are missing something else. Maybe they have some other personal or health problems that are affecting them being successful. So how are we as a company committing to the community to address all those social needs and necessities so that the people, once they come to you, then they're successful and you can help them grow? Thank you, Cheryl.
What about you, Dawn? What are some minority focused resources locally that our recruiters can tap into?
Yeah, I agree very much with Cheryl that so much of it is about connecting with those populations and having them recognize who you are. We do have such a rich population of historically Black colleges and universities in this area. So I think it's very important, not to just post a position there, but to actually build relationships and build, brand, for a lack of a better word, and name recognition with those organizations so that they understand that you do have openings available and that type of thing. I think that there are a lot of resources online that can help you identify other types of universities or fraternities, sororities that are focused on other types of diversity as well. So they're definitely out there, but it's the connection and the communication, I think that is key.
Thank you, Richard. I hope Don and Cheryl didn't take all your ideas. Do you have any other minority-focused institutions that we could tap into for recruitment?
Yeah, but of course they did. They both took it. But what I would like to echo and add to that is, yes, I believe that being able to post these jobs in diverse place and how we are reaching out to more of minority colleges and university. Again, it starts with us, and that is one of the reasons why we at Novozymes we have switched over to the company I was telling you about, Circa, that has a broader spectrum that can reach out to many different of those colleges and minority universities that we may not have been touching on previously.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question from the attendees. I'm gonna kick it to Dawn for this one.
Tiffany.
Oh, sorry.
I hate to cut you off. We have to stop this panel short, but this is a wonderful conversation. And if I can be so presumptuous to encourage our viewers to maybe reach out to you all one-on-one on LinkedIn, and the conversations don't have to stop, right? We as representatives from all our companies, we're kind of all in this together as life science companies in North Carolina. So thank you again, panelists, for a wonderful dialogue. I'd like to next move into our next panel discussion. Retain and engage panel discussion. Excuse me, I'm a little, to innovate, we must be diverse. To enable diversity and thrive, we must have equity. To activate diversity and equity, we must be inclusive. And to unlock our potential, we need belonging. Next, we will hear from a panel of experts on what it means to have an engaging workplace that retains our company's top talent. Melissa Bishop Murphy is our moderator today. She is Senior Director of National Government Relations and Multicultural Affairs for Pfizer. Melissa has a wealth of experience in management, government affairs, public affairs, and alliance development at the state and federal levels. She serves as the co-chair of Pfizer's Multicultural Center of Excellence. Prior to Pfizer, Melissa was general counsel for the Department of Medical Assistance. Additionally, she provided project management, technical analysis, research supports for projects related to Medicare and Medicaid programs, payment system design, and provider reimbursement. Thank you all for joining us today. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shayla, and thank you to North Carolina Biotechnology Association for this wonderful event today. So we've heard about attracting and recruiting. Now we're going to have an excellent panel talking about engaging and retaining employees. Our first panelist is Dr. Gregory Dennis. Dr. Dennis is Senior Vice President, Research and Development, Global Head, Therapeutic Science and Strategy for IQVIA. Dr. Dennis provides strategic oversight for all therapeutic areas in which IQVIA supports clinical research with sponsors. Before joining the biopharma industry in 2007, he served as Chief of Rheumatology and Clinical Immunology at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Our next panelist will be Danielle Pavlik, Director, Chief Diversity Officer of SAS. Ms. Pavlik serves as a change agent and thought leader in creating and executing workforce diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. In her role, she consults with business leaders and employees to develop interventions that infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion in how the organization thinks, acts, and operates globally. Last but certainly not least is Ms. Yvette Pittman, Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager, Biogen. Ms. Pittman serves as the DE&I site leader at the Biogen Research Triangle Park campus. She supports the organization's globally focused on managing external partnerships, delivering workforce initiatives, managing DE&I data, and supporting the employee resources networks. Welcome, panelists. So why don't we first start with hearing from you on some of the strategies that each of you have implemented in your organization that have been successful in improving engagement. And also, what advice for companies that are at the very beginning stages of D&I would you give them? Dr. Dennis, why don't we start with you first?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this esteemed panel here. Increasing diversity and giving more opportunities for underrepresented groups, including economically disadvantaged people, is one of the great challenges that are facing biotechnology, health science companies, as well as big pharma today. And I think that if we think about some of the things that have transpired with respect to Black and Hispanic workers, that will give us a clue as to how we might be able to increase representation in all groups. Because if one thinks about the pipeline for getting individuals and more individuals involved in the life sciences, it's important for us to recognize that we have to pay attention with all phases of that pipeline, and to ensure that individuals are not opting out at points in time in which we could retain them in the workforce. So if we think about Black and Hispanic workers specifically, we know that they continue to be underrepresented in the STEM workforce compared with their share of all workers, including computing jobs, which we have actually seen extensive growth over the last several years. We know that the long-term outlook for diversity in the STEM workforce is closely tied to representation in the STEM educational system, particularly across the nation's colleges and universities. And that's why it also is important for us to recognize the number of colleges and universities that exist in North Carolina that specifically have STEM programs. We know that Black and Hispanic adults are less likely to earn degrees in STEM than other degree fields, and they continue to make up a lower share of STEM graduates relative to their share of the adult population. And in fact, when one looks at targeted programs, asking ourselves the question, can targeted programs improve diversity in the STEM workforce? We can look at the Harvard Business Review that looked 5 years after recruitment efforts targeting unrepresented groups. And we actually saw the percentage of individuals increase in those demographics, and that companies experience considerable growth in managerial diversity when they focus on voluntary diversity training, college recruitment of women and minorities, voluntary mentorship programs, as well as diversity task forces. Those are all initiatives that we are incorporating here at IQVIA in an attempt to improve upon the diversity that currently exists. So not only do we have to think about, though, getting kids involved in STEM programs at a younger stage, but we also need to prevent candidates from opting out at all stages of the pipeline. It's not really a leaky pipeline, right? We're actually leaving individuals on the table when these programs are advancing. And one of the questions or comments that I get.
If you don't mind, I would love to hear from Danielle in terms of what SAS is also doing in terms of their strategies.
Go ahead. So I just wanted to quickly say, though, that we have to make sure that we are retaining individuals at all levels. So please go on.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis. Danielle, how about SAS? What are you guys doing in terms of your strategies?
Yeah, I wanted to first start off by talking a little bit about how we started. So I'm going to take a different angle here real quickly. And I believe that the strategy that SAS used that worked really well for us has really been centered on employee input and feedback. It's easy there, D&I initiatives are popping up left and right, and that's fantastic. But it's easy to, Google a canned, type in DEI strategy, that works for other companies. And that is probably more than likely not going to work for everyone's organization. It will only go so far unless the strategy truly reflects the needs, the wants of employees and supports all of our employees and really reflecting our entire employee population. So I wanted to just kind of take a step back to about 5 years ago when we launched our dedicated intentional DEI strategy at SAS. We conducted focus groups with our employees from all backgrounds. We did virtual focus groups, in-person focus groups with employees in the US, employees outside the US, with managers. And that's how we came up with our initial strategy. That's how we developed our mission and our vision, which we are still enacting today. And one of the things I wanted to mention here is that in order to do that, so you have your strategy, which is, developed by your employees. That is really where, I believe engagement really starts. Is you got to get the buy-in from our employees, of course, from our leadership, but from our employees. That's what makes them want to be a part of this work, knowing that their input is valued. And in order to do that, when we talk about engagement, it really requires strong and frequent communication about progress, about goals. But communication only goes so far, right? It needs to be backed by action. And so building trust and transparency with employees is really where we've seen a lot of success in really getting to the point where we have engagement, and then from there improving engagement. Dr. Dennis had talked about some of the strategies they're using where that really is effective, right? It's because you have the support from employees from the get-go.
Thank you. Yvette, what is Biogen doing?
Great. So thank you for the question, Melissa. So at Biogen, we've also done a significant amount of work to improve employee engagement. And I often will say that I'm a part of a small but mighty team of 3 employees, and we support over 9,000 employees globally. Wow. We really rely upon our employee resource networks internally. Historically, they've been one of the best ways we've engaged with our employee population. So very similar to what Danielle just shared. Because of the nature of these affinity groups, these employees, they have at their disposal, various programs and initiatives that are revolved around professional development, networking, community involvement. We currently have 7 employee resource networks internally, and our goal is to launch our 8th one by the end of the year. And again, these are led by employee volunteers. So this is and these are individuals who are highly passionate about embedding inclusion and belonging into our workplace culture. These employees, they go above and beyond to deliver programming for us year round. And honestly, we could not do this work without their commitment. One of the things that my team is really proud of that we've done this past year, and it started mid-2020, is that we started to host these office hours where employees had the opportunity to share with us their stories, their perspectives on the recent events that have been happening, across our globe and the impact on our communities. These topics around hate crimes, devastations to communities. These office hours really served as an avenue for employees who were also passionate about DE&I, but also a safe space just to sort of share how they were feeling in the moment, because employee sentiment, is very important to us. Now, to date, we've hosted probably over 70 office hours. And at the peak of those, we saw hundreds of employees attend these calls. It makes it very challenging when you have that many people on a call, of course. But for those who were able to speak, they were extremely vulnerable and courageous at the same time. So they're sharing what their struggles were, what they were learning from what was happening, and really what they saw as potential wins around DE&I in our journey within the organization. And we've also seen employees sort of take the lead as well within their own teams and start to create these working groups of DE&I committees. And that's really helped us to continue our journey in driving this work forward within the organization. The other part of your question, Melissa, was around what advice we would give to other companies. And I would say it's really important just to take baby steps at first, because it's a lot. It's a lot that you want to try to tackle. And it's going to take a village. It's going to take a lot of people to really help you get there. So really start to engage your key stakeholders, those who you deem as advocates for the work internally, who are champions right now for DE&I that don't wear the hat of HR. I think those are the ones who can really help you sort of drive change. And from there, start to think about as well the voice of the employee. What's the employee sentiment like? Because they have to have a voice at the table. What are you learning from them? That's going to help you really understand your employee population. And then from there, establish a couple of goals, a couple of priorities that you want to focus on. And I think the biggest thing to remember is that with this type of work, it's not linear, right? You're going to move forward. You're going to step back several times. Sometimes you're not going to move at all. And just know that that's okay. And that's to be expected. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves with at Biogen is, we have this mantra that everyone owns DE&I. It's not my team of 3 people. It's not HR. It's every single employee. Everyone has to play their own role in this. And when we do that, we can start to see the momentum start to shift. As tempting as it is to sometimes feel like you just can't get it all done and you want to give up, don't do that. Again, take the small wins. Just continue to remember that, this is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. But the beauty is that when you're in the space where you have employees who are they're passionate about this work and they want to help you drive the work forward, that's going to make the journey a little less challenging.
Yes, so Yvette, you got a question that came in regards to expounding on how you select the office hours. If you don't mind answering it in the chat so that we can keep the panel moving. And so I'll move to Dr. Dennis, if you don't mind, Dr. Dennis, because really you had talked about the Harvard study, but can you elaborate a little bit more about how can we make biotech careers attractive to diverse candidates?
Yes, that's a very good question, and it's a multi-million-dollar question for that matter. It's almost I sort of think about that as I do a lot of things in terms of ensuring that we're getting individuals interested in careers and such. We have to make it fun. It has to be interesting to the candidates. And that's where starting at an earlier age may be helpful, but that could be helpful even after individuals have entered into their career. And the one thing that individuals keep saying to me over and over again is they have to have the vision to be able to see themselves in that particular career and be able to advance throughout the career to a point at which they will feel gratified in the work, as well as having the necessary work-life balance. So I think it's important that we engage individuals, as I was mentioning earlier, at all levels at all stages of the pipeline. Don't forget individuals who are in their mid-career and entering into their senior careers, because those individuals may actually be the role models for individuals who are earlier or who have yet to even enter into the career.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis. Danielle, what's necessary to retain current talent in our organizations, in particular in the state of North Carolina, especially for millennials? We saw a question from the earlier panel about these millennials. How do we do it? Danielle?
Yeah, sure. So the Triangle area certainly continues to be a growth and innovation hub for biotechnology, for the tech industry, and I'm sure many other industries as well. And the pandemic has also certainly exacerbated the need for employers to be proactive in how they recruit, as we heard from the last panel, engage, develop, and retain employees, and especially millennial employees, as you mentioned. And there's kind of a phenomenon right now, you may have heard of the Great Resignation, right, that we're experiencing right now as a nation. It's certainly, a candidate market, and employees have options, more options than really ever before, between borderless hiring, hiring kind of outside of even the state of North Carolina, flexible work hours, being forced upon us. Many people have said that they could, never work from home full time, and now they have. So I think the pandemic has also brought a lot into perspectives for employees where they may, now are reevaluating their career priorities. So I wanted to just kind of touch on a couple things that I think really all employees, not only millennials, are looking for as it relates to staying at a company. I think this really pertains to all employees, but there's 5 areas that I'm just going to real quick kind of go through. First being, of course, meaningful work. And Dr. Dennis just touched on that. I mean, that is incredibly important. Growth opportunities. It's, imperative that employees feel that, they're being invested in, their career enrichment opportunities. Gone are the days of people working, 10, 20 plus years at a company. But if employees can have multiple careers at a company, that is really attractive, especially to younger generation. They might start their career, for us in a testing role, a software testing role, and might find that, they want to go into consulting. And I'm sure that that's very similar in biotech as well. Flexibility. I think that's, goes without speaking. People want to be able to live and work wherever they want, and not have, to be glued to a desk. I think that really appeals to, again, to all people, but especially to the younger generation that might not want to stay in the same place. The other thing that's also really interesting is employees want to feel that, invested in, they want career development opportunities, things like mental health days and recharge days, right? Like that is really, really important now more than ever before, between all of the things pandemic related in our social sphere, as we've talked a lot about today, just feeling that, it's okay to be human and to feel things and to know that we're really supported. And then, of course, the last thing I wanted to touch on is, we're here to talk about inclusion. So that sense of belonging, that is everything. Dr. Dennis mentioned, you want to see people in the roles in which you aspire to be in one day. That sense of representation and belonging is so important, and it makes or breaks a career experience. And so I think the more we can establish a sense of community, as Yvette mentioned, with our ERGs, that right there is, icing on the cake. And that is really what I believe really keeps people around, is all of the perks, compensation, all of those things, but you can get that anywhere. It's that sense of belonging that really keeps people, that I think employers really need to hone in on now more than ever before.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Danielle. I think that the we call them colleague resource groups, play an important role in retention for sure. It definitely provides that sense of belonging and a safe place for employees. Yvette, in your comments, you have mentioned your courageous conversations, your listening sessions. How do you select the topics, and how do you select sensitive topics given the context of psychological safety for employees, the continued social impact around race and ethnicity? And that came from Edwina May, that question.
Sure. So oftentimes it comes from the employees. I think we've done a great job of creating sort of this safe space for employees just to reach out to our team to say this is sort of front of mind. And of course, we're also aware of what's happening at a global level as well. And if we feel as though the response is pretty imminent, then we want to definitely try to schedule those office hours for employees. And what we tend to find is, oftentimes people just are just to listen. They're just there just to learn and just sort of hear what their colleagues are sort of experiencing. But then you have this other population that is there to truly share because they have immediate family that's being impacted. So it sort of goes back to, again, that voice of the employee, just letting them know that this is what you're here for. This is your purpose, to serve them in this way. And then they sort of bring to you, this is sort of front of mind. I would love if we could have some time for this. And then we just sort of schedule these sessions, typically 1 or 2, just to see what the turnout's going to be like. And honestly, I think for the most part, we continue to be overwhelmed with the amount of employees that show up either there to listen and share or just be a supportive colleague. You know, we talk a lot about this concept of allyship, where, you know, it's not so much now just about talking about it, but it's sort of showing up in the moment, right, and taking action on it. And that's one way that you can sort of show your support to your colleagues in those moments that matter.
Thank you. Dr. Dennis, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I'd like to just add that, you know, I think the employee resource groups, is what we call them at IQVIA, are extremely important, as has been pointed out. Keep in mind, though, many of them want to be more involved in what the company actually does from the work perspective of the company. So for example, at IQVIA, we are intimately involved in developing clinical trials. And so we have a diversity in clinical trials initiative that is underway. And what I've found is that individuals feel really gratified by being able to participate and contribute to that particular initiative, as well as in fact-finding activities, data gathering activities that is underway at IQVIA in order to fill the gap of knowledge that currently exists within the publication network that are out there. So get them more involved in what you do as a company, and they will feel very gratified in being able to contribute to the overall success of the organization.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis. We certainly saw that at Pfizer when we were diversifying our clinical trials for our COVID-19 vaccine. The colleague resource groups, employee resource groups were very engaged in sharing the information. And also they were engaged around this whole issue of vaccine competence. So you are so right. What are some of the challenges and barriers you have dealt with in the journey to be an inclusive organization? I really would love to hear from each of you. Why don't we start with you, Danielle, and then we'll go to Yvette and then Dr. Dennis. So some of the challenges and barriers that you personally have dealt with in your journey to build an inclusive environment. Danielle?
Yeah, I go back to kind of what I shared in the beginning around, you know, we talk a lot about DEI. It's top of mind, no doubt. You turn on the TV, you can't not talk about it, but it's so important to back it up with action. And I think that's where really kind of the rubber meets the road. And that's the really hard part, is that behavior change. Change is hard, we know. You know, we are comfortable with the status quo. And I think oftentimes, you know, sometimes employees struggle with, you know, we're comfortable with status quo. It's hard to see the value up front in doing something different. And I think people need to see that by being more inclusive and taking actionable steps to do that, people aren't losing anything. And we are, you know, not only are they not losing anything, we're also gaining a lot by fostering a more inclusive and equitable work environment. And so I think when we're all individually doing our best, we're collectively producing better results. And I think a barrier that I know I've experienced is, you know, people pushing back on that, you know, okay, so what will this look like in action, right? Well, by being more intentional about our hiring practices, we're gaining more. It might mean that time to fill might be a little bit longer, but we're being more intentional in our approach. And so I think that's where I've experienced in my career in DEI for the last 10 years, it's really in change management. That is like the hardest part. I don't think having to sell people on D&I is too hard. I think there's a lot of like stats out there that prove, and a lot of really great case studies to say like there's value in this, but to actually get people to change their behavior and to get uncomfortable with the change, that's really hard. And so we're living and breathing this every day. But I think, again, the more we can demonstrate the value in making that change, that it produces a better outcome, a better output, that's where we get people to get on board.
Thanks, Danielle. How about you, Yvette? What has been personally some of the challenges and barriers you face?
So I definitely have to echo what Daniel just shared. You know, this work is not easy, right? And so you have to come to a place where you sort of accept that everyone does not see things through your lens. They do not see the value. They do not see the effort. They just don't see it. And so for me, it's been about, sort of one, accepting that. And then two, realizing, you have to sort of take this phased approach to hopefully get them to a place of at least compliance. So that's really taking a step right to drill down a little bit, again, accept what reality is, and then implement some steps towards education. And how do you create greater awareness around this? If you're in an environment where people are very much data driven, then let the research sort of back up your facts. This is why it's important. Diverse teams, they create X. I think if you take that approach and realize that along the way, there is no defined timeline with this, right? So you're not going to convince people overnight. It's not going to take a year. Some is going to take much longer than that. But knowing that you're in it for the long haul, I think is going to be critical. And just realizing that that consistent messaging is key, especially when it can come from top down. Because if they can continue to hear this messaging from your CEO down to say, this is why it's important to our organization. We have to remain competitive in this market. If those are some of the resounding things that are consistently shared, then hopefully those who are not sort of seeing it through that lens will at least sort of start to see some of the reason why, and they can start to support the business case. And I think the other thing around this is, the time commitment, right? The prioritization of the work, because everyone's busy, and we're sort of in this space sometimes where people see this work as an addition to what they have to do versus it being embedded in what they do already. And I think that goes around that whole, behavioral shift, the mind shift of seeing the work as an imperative. This is something that we're going to do to make ourselves sustainable as an organization so that we can continue to attract the diverse talent that we want in the future. And it sort of goes back to something I shared earlier as well. And that's sort of pulling people along, right? Pulling your advocates along, your champions along, dealt with that messaging, because your people leaders, your managers, your executives, they all have to see the value in this. And when they don't, then that means it's your job then to start educating on the why. And that's when you really have to dig down deep into this work. When I think about our team internal to Biogen, we understand our impact on culture. We understand that's our remit. And, but again, we can only take it so far if we don't have those others sort of helping us with this journey along the way.
Thank you, Yvette. Dr. Dennis, in particular, with you leading the research and development at your company, certainly diversity, equity, inclusion, that journey has probably been more personal to you. Would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, having been a physician involved in clinical research now for well over 30 years, I do take a personal interest in it because I've seen it evolve over the last few decades, and I've seen a lot of starts and stops. And so I think a lot about what is necessary to ensure that we have sustainable advancement to achieve these particular objectives. And so it's a major challenge, and there's no right answer, no answer that is immediately apparent to us within the companies. I will say, though, that in order to advance these initiatives, something that Yvette was pointing out is many of the individuals that are excited and enthusiastic and motivated to participate in the initiatives that are underway at our companies. We also have to recognize that may not always be their day job. And so whatever resources, whatever tools that we can give them as they participate in these activities to ensure that they are not overwhelmed and give up as a consequence of the load is extremely important. We have to provide the necessary support to ensure the advancement of these particular initiatives. It's going to be a long haul process, and there's no easy answer. So we're going to have to be very thoughtful and deliberate in our approaches.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis. You couldn't have said it better. A lot of DE&I work has happened recently as a result of major social issues and events like the George Floyd murder in 2020. We have the Atlanta spa shootings, the Asian community. How has your company responded to these major social changes? We'll start with you, Yvette, and then Dr. Dennis, and then Danielle.
Sure. So one of the things that I've already shared is the office hours. That was something that was a direct output of some of those events from last year. Another thing that we did, we leveraged the support of our Mosaic Employee Resource Network, which is our multicultural network. Because we needed to understand, what are the employees now wanting to see as sort of the outcome of George Floyd murder was happening. And we were able to partner with these individuals, and they were amazing partners in this work to help us sort of create an enhanced DE&I strategy for our organization. We launched the strategy in June of last year, and it sort of focuses on 4 quadrants, and I won't go into them in depth today. But one is around health equity. We've talked a lot about clinical trial representation, so definitely putting a spotlight on our areas for opportunity there. When we think about financial empowerment within our communities, Biogen made a substantial donation to one of the oldest, largest bank, Black-owned bank in the country, in Boston, One United Bank. We also rolled out, and we're still in process of doing this, some mandatory trainings for our people leaders. We needed to build some muscle within this space so they can truly understand the importance of recruitment, hiring talent, promoting talent, retaining talent. So some trainings right now are being assigned to those leaders, and we'll also have assigned trainings to our individual contributors as well around DE&I practices, around bias, around allyship. This is sort of our effort to make sure that everyone is sort of learning. This is a journey for us. How do we continue to learn within this space? And then the other piece is really around the investment into our talent. As we talk about representation and making sure that when we attract talent, people can see people who look like them in these types of roles. What are we doing as a company? So we knew we had opportunity there. So we put out some metrics to our teams to say we want to see an increase in the numbers of representation in various roles. So that's really been a top-down approach. It's been a lot of hard work. We've been able to partner now with HBCUs around internships, which has been so exciting to see. We had some summer interns who just ended their assignment last week, and I myself was able to manage an intern from Clark Atlanta University. I'm a young man who probably would have never known anything about DE&I, but now he's passionate about a career, hopefully, within this space. So I think, those were some of the critical things that we did early on to really start to sort of set the pace for what's to come. We also hosted some intervention trainings for bystander intervention trainings last year through an organization called Holla Back, something I would highly recommend others to do if you haven't already done so. Michelle, our CEO, was very adamant in his stance around zero tolerance for any of this type of behavior within the organization. And so I think, those types of things really sort of help to sort of set the stage for our organization. And one thing that I'll share real quickly is I'm so proud that we were also able to invest back into North Carolina with the creation of a leadership development program for professionals of color. We were able to partner with an organization out of Cambridge, Massachusetts called The Partnership. And we launched a North Carolina Mid-Career Leadership Accelerator Program, which launched in March of this year, and it will end in December. And it's really focused on the advancement of people of color. You're able to engage with others in different industry and sort of learn about yourself in the process and what it takes for you to excel within your organization. So it's those types of things that we're hopeful that we can continue to communicate and get more people involved in those types of opportunities. But I'm really proud that we were able to initiate that program specifically within our state for those companies in RTP and in the Charlotte surrounding area.
Thank you. Danielle?
Yeah, so Yvette touched on a lot of things I was going to mention, and I wrote down Holla Back. We're going to have to take a look at that. That sounds amazing. Very, very similar to what she had shared at Biogen. Training, of course, is important. That should go without saying, right? It shouldn't be, only the things happening in the social sphere that are driving that. However, the timeliness is really important. We too also worked with we call them employee inclusion groups, EIGs. We worked with our Black Initiatives group, we call BIG, and our SAS International Connection group, SAS-IC, to address the issues that you mentioned when you asked the question around the Atlanta shooting and, of course, the murder of George Floyd. And that has been just truly, truly a game changer for SAS. I have to give them so much credit in, having these incredibly uncomfortable, difficult conversations, and to do so in a way that was beautifully facilitated, coming from a very genuine place. I think, again, it's the action. It's having these conversations really help to enforce what is being shared in the training, but to really bring that to life. And then the last thing I wanted to just say is I go back to employee communication. I cannot touch on that enough, that when a crisis occurs, it is important for businesses to be vocal, to take a stance, going back to millennials, the question from before, what do millennials look for? They look for companies that take a social stance. So I do think that's important. But first, I cannot say this enough, talk to your employees. Putting messages out there, on social media, it does matter, but employees need to hear that message first. And, we worked really closely with our employees in the big community, in the Black Initiatives group, before we communicated to our greater employee population. That authentic piece is really important to avoid, virtue signaling or avoiding just words for the sake of saying something not backed by action. So I just wanted to end real quick on talk to your employees, because that authentic approach, it will make or break your DEI work if you're not doing exactly what Dr. Dennis and Yvette talked about by engaging your employees.
I'll leave the last few minutes to you, Dr. Dennis. What's IQVIA doing, and how do you all handle these social issues that come up?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the most important things we did after the events that transpired, actually, I'll say that have been transpiring over the last several years here, but just essentially came to a head in 2020 when with the activity surrounding George Floyd and such. But IQVIA was very perceptive and about what was going to be needed in order to ensure that we kept our employees together in a unified fashion. So we initiated the Black Outreach and Engagement Initiative, which serves as the umbrella organization throughout IQVIA to entertain a number of the topics that we've been talking about just today, with subcomponents that ensure that we're paying particular attention to the HR issues, retain, recruit, as well as the communication issues to internal employees, as well as to external individuals that we want to partner with or that want to partner with us, and a number of other key areas that are important along these lines. That, I think, was essential to ensure that we're all speaking from the same page, and that the objectives and purpose that we have in mind gets cascaded appropriately throughout the organization to ensure that all of the employees understand exactly what we are hoping to accomplish here. That we want, that this is a vision that is much bigger than us, right? But that we have a role to play in ensuring that we are moving the community in the direction that we need to do in order to eliminate health disparities.
Dr. Dennis, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much. Yvette, thank you so much. Danielle, thank you so much. To the audience, I hope that you gain a lot of little nuggets that you can take back to your companies to engage and retain your diverse talent. Thank you all, especially to the North Carolina Biotechnology Association for this wonderful event. And so now I'll turn it over to Neil.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate our panelists and our moderators for all the things they're said and all the things they're doing. Just keep this message to you. Everything we do is all in a response. And so one more thank you I want to give out. I'm going to ask Shaylah if she come on up on the stage and join me as well. She wasn't expecting this, and we're keeping our social distance. But Shaylah had mentioned earlier that we met here a couple of years ago at an event. And I believe that our meeting wasn't a mistake. It happened for a reason. And I truly believe in that. And it's kind of like a melody. If you understand and know music, it's not accidental. It gets in your head and you think about it. And it actually motivates you and it moves you. And Shaylah, you've been that melody. You've been able to move us in a way that we hadn't really thought about before, or maybe we were afraid of. And I thank you for that, for the fact that, maybe that movement was, maybe it's just like with poise and grace, like a ballerina. Or it could be that more rhythmic, that would be like someone who's doing a wobble. But at the end of the day, it's the melody that stays in your head that matters, because it's a melody for diversity. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to close this out with just a little business imperative. You would have to be living under a rock to not know how many new companies are coming to the Triangle area, new life science companies are coming to the Triangle area, or how many existing life science companies are expanding in the Triangle area. And what that means is that our workforce, the ability to recruit and attract, is going to become that much more important, that we think deeply, have those difficult conversations. I want to thank our NCBIO team. I want to thank our NCBIO team, Laura, Brenda, John, Amber, thank you so much. The NC Biotechnology Center, especially Sean Fegan. The diversity committee members, we have worked together so well over the past couple of months to put this together. And I want to implore all of our viewers to stay tuned, because there is more to come. I want to thank all our panelists, all our moderators, and to you, the viewers, for being curious, for being invested in these topics. I'm going to turn it over to John to close us out. John?
Okay, thank you, Shaylah. First thing is, I think we owe Shaylah and Neil a big gratitude for all the work they've done in addition to their daytime jobs. And their passion in this area is exemplary. And I've learned a lot from them just in working with them. And Brenda doing all the behind the scenes work she's been a workhorse putting this together. But Shaylah mentioned, I'm not going to talk long. Everybody else had much more important things to say, but I just want to leave you with, there's more to come. As Shaylah mentioned, we've hired a consulting group to help us develop the roadmap. We were looking to learn about what some of the key themes are coming out of today's, and certainly one in my mind is, if we ignore the human element of change management in anything like this, we're going to fail. And so people tend to just automatically be resistant to change, no matter how good the change is. But so we'll be developing things, and this will be a series of programs probably over the next 6 to 9 months and beyond, because it is a journey. It's not just an event. And this was just a kickoff. And I'd like to finally thank all the panelists and the moderators and Mona for doing a tremendous job in helping us. Because if we help each other in a situation like this, if one wins, we all win, right? So even though it's a competitive hiring environment, we need to help each other in this area, because it's the right thing to do. So I'm going to leave you with that. And again, look for more things to come, and we'll be talking soon. Thanks.